My feeling about women's health is that we have to change the conversation. We need a revolution. We need to stand up and say, we're not going to stand for this anymore.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Dr. Sara Szal Gottfried is a physician, researcher, author, and educator. She graduated from Harvard Medical School and MIT and has now become a global keynote speaker and revolutionizer. Her focus is at the interface of mental and physical health, N-of-1 trial design, personalized molecular profiling, and how to leverage these tools to improve health outcomes. In this episode, we explore the pervasive exclusion of women's health from our current medical paradigm and the need to change the conversation and the research about it. We explore the need to address trauma not only for its mental and physical health implications, but also its impact on planetary and social homeostasis. Sara shares her fears and desires while undergoing a change in last name, which is a mirror of how our health journeys always entail transformations in identity and the stories we can't escape from ourselves, but that we can and must reinvent. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Dr. Sara Gottfried. Sara, thank you so much for being here.
Victor, always such a pleasure to be with you.
So we were just talking right before we started recording that we are a bit stressed lately. Your new book is launching next week, and you just came off out of a retreat. So how does it feel today, Monday, for you?
I appreciate the question. As I feel into how to answer that, there's a couple levels to it. There's the delight of connecting with you. You feel like a hermano, a brother, since I got to hang out with you at the conference that you led a few months back. And I didn't get quite enough sleep last night, so I'm someone who tracks my sleep pretty carefully. I think I got about 6 hours because I arrived late back from Los Angeles. My plane was delayed. But then I also got a 2-hour hike in, kind of between patients and podcasts today. And nature just always revitalizes me. So that feels really good. And this is my 6th book that I'm launching. So I feel like I've learned by now, or at least I should have learned by now, how to serve, but to do it from a full cup, how to do it, with energy left over for the people that I love, for myself. And so this feels like one of those days where it's a little more challenging, but I'm noticing that with all my previous books, a week before the pub date, the date that the book comes out, I'm usually in much more dire straits. So I think we're making progress, Victor. All to say, I think we're making progress.
Thank you, Sara. And for me, I've been for the past years, I've been much better also managing a lot of things, especially the last few weeks. I went to Qatar 2 weeks ago, and then I've been traveling every week since February, since the beginning of February. And now, on Saturday morning, I just woke up with a big thing in my throat. And I wrote this morning in my journal that, my body is responding. And I said, but you know what? It's not my body. I am body. It's just me here, So thank you. And I've always loved how slow you talk. Have you always talked with this speed? Because I think it says something about you.
I love what you notice. So I speak a little slower than I used to, in part because I've been a public speaker for the past few decades, and I developed a voice disorder. And so, as part of the voice disorder, I can't say as many words on the same breath count as I used to be able to. So, that's forced me to do a little more abdominal breathing when I'm speaking, to speak on the exhale. And my exhale is just not as long as it used to be because of my vocal cords. So, it's a little slower. And I think you might also be picking up on something else, which is homeostasis. And one of the things that I think is such a problem in conventional medicine is that it's so disease focused. It's not focused on health. And usually the definition of health is the absence of disease, at least in mainstream medicine. And I really believe that we've got this opportunity to be thinking about what is health? What do we want it to be? What's the kind of health that we want to manifest? And for me, a sense of balance, a sense of homeostasis with mind, body, spirit, with your immune system, your nervous system, your endocrine system, your psychology, that's really at the heart of health. And so I hope that the way that I speak, the way that I try to regulate people who listen to me, um, the amazing people I get to work with, like you, Victor. I hope that there's a way that I'm providing some homeostasis and co-regulation with the way that I speak.
Yeah, and I think that your body, which is you, um, wants to talk um, with a conscious sense of speed, in a sense. And I believe that in this definition of health that we're trying to create is just not only that we want to be, redefining and rebalancing all these things, but also be very transparent when we aren't, because this is a generation thing. This is something that will happen in centuries, and we're just part of the transition. So slowing down in our own um, speed of talking, I think it's just a yeah, a feature, a sample that this can happen, and it's happening. Um, I wanted I told you when I invited you to the podcast that I didn't want to talk about hormones and stress and perimenopause and fertility and birth control and microbiome and insulin and fertility and nutrition and supplementation. And at the same time, whatever we end up talking today, it's all related to that. And then I think that's a beautiful thing. And I wanted to ask you, because lately I've been thinking a lot about the challenges and disparities surrounding women's health and this failure of Western medicine for centuries, actually, to recognize sex-specific issues that women face. Like it's undervalued, it's undermined, it's even underestimated, because we have only focused on the reproductive health of women, because that's the only thing that in science has had an entrance, in a sense. So it's also under researched and underdiagnosed. And I wanted to get the hold of you because in Qatar, actually, I heard a guy from the UN talking about this, and it was so different hearing it from a man rather than a woman. And I'm sure you've bumped into this thing several times in your career, and I wanted to open this discussion with you. How do you feel about this?
I feel that it's a health hazard to be female in our culture. It's a sad state of affairs. There's a lot of statistics to support this. Whether you look at autoimmune disease, 4 out of 5 people with autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, 4 out of 5 are women. Women have got double the rates of depression, Alzheimer's disease, insomnia. We've got higher rates of trauma, especially sexual trauma. Even when we're exposed to the same toxic stress and trauma, we've got more post-traumatic stress disorder. We've got more pain. There are ways that some of this is biological, some of it is sex differences, but a lot of it is gender. It's socially constructed. So I was just reading today a McKinsey report about women's health. And McKinsey was writing about how it's this $1 trillion opportunity through 2040 to really take on women's health. And on the one hand, I'm happy that women's health is getting its due. It's getting the attention it needs because, frankly, when I went to medical school more than 30 years ago, the same thing was being said. And the gaps really haven't gotten any better. So, my feeling about women's health is that we have to change the conversation. We need a revolution. We need to like stand up and say, we're not going to stand for this anymore. And waiting for the people with power, waiting for governments, the United Nations, um, the people with power to change it, it's not happening. At least it hasn't over the course of my career. And so that means we have to do a bottom up revolution. We have to do that together as individuals. We have to do it. Women certainly need to do it, and the men who care about women, like you, we need to stand together and just say, this is ridiculous. Like the bias that exists in the research studies, the ways that women suffer so much more with these health consequences. We can't stand for it anymore. We've got to change it.
Yes. And I believe in the same sense that patients need to show the system that the system is not working in patients, regardless of gender. Um, what I believe will also happen in a sense is that the definition of health, as such, like in the definition of wealth in terms of monetary gains, that has also been defined by masculine energies and by the patriarchy in a sense. We need, and I'm not, and I'm we're talking about the gender obviously, but I'm inviting here the conversation to this feminine energy, feminine intuition, feminine way of understanding, which is still difficult to put in words, because I think goes beyond the language that we have been given. I'm thinking about this language of, I'll use the word, but it's not the word. A more nature approach to life and symbiosis and homeostasis, as you've put it with masculine words. The same with money. Like women know much more about what is wealth than just a number in an account. So the point here is, in this bottom-up revolution, how can we raise our voice, but at the same time not only not putting another structure, but changing the whole way we understand what is health and wealth and all these things that we value, like sustainability and education and all these things. I know it's kind of abstract, but you get the gist.
I do. It's a great question. And so we might want to linger in the question a little bit more. I don't have great solutions for you, but I can tell you, I know what it feels like. And it feels softer, it feels more collaborative, it feels gentler than the way we usually go about making change. So when you look at masculine and feminine energies, the kind of people that I'm attracted to, the kind of people that I love to work with, are people who have done a lot of inner work and they've got a sense of balance. They've got a lot of self awareness. And I think that's what's being called for here, that we think about these ecosystems in which we want to do a better job with how we take care of our patients, our clients. When we think about, the way that we construct healthcare around health instead of disease, instead of it being disease centered, it's really critical. And, um, what I love about your question is that it feels like it's calling upon a level of consciousness that doesn't exist right now. And another way that I've been feeling into this is there's so much emphasis on ROI, return on investment, whether you're talking about a startup or uh, some new business in healthcare, or artificial intelligence. And I wish that we could shift toward understanding return on investment in terms of consciousness, because that's really what we need right now.
I love how you begin answering with the I don't know and with it feels like, because I do think that we have that memory in us of understanding how that feels, and hence we project how it should feel or it could feel. And I think that in medicine, in science, in technology, in all the ways we have built to survive, we forgot to bring the feeling with us. Just buying those images of success or of whatever of success, and even when we get it, we get the health, we get the longevity, we get the money, we get whatever, the feeling, it's still it's still not there. So the hope, in a sense, that I have with this is that this revolution should also feel beautiful, should have a lot of dance, should have a lot of smiles, should have a lot of rest, should have a lot of patience, which at the same time, and the paradox is that we tell ourselves we don't have enough time because everything is disintegrating, the planet and society and all these things. So yeah, I think I don't have the answer neither, but how much can we bet that it should feel this way and just follow that intuition and in a sense, release the outcome?
When I was speaking into how I know this feels, what I'm speaking into is a state of regulation, a state of, um, having, feeling like my heart is open and that my ego and my mind are right sized, feeling like my blood sugar is stable and not too spiky, feeling like the fluid balance between my sympathetic nervous system, kind of the on button for my nervous system, versus the parasympathetic nervous system, the stay and play half of the autonomic nervous system, that there's a really good balance between the two, and that my heart rate variability is stable. So, I would say I spent probably most of my career until age 50 in a state of dysregulation. There's a way that conventional medicine can be very dysregulating. And I imagine there's people who are watching or listening to us right now who have been failed by the conventional medical system. We don't want to throw it out because, especially for acute problems, you break a leg, you've got an infection. We need the conventional medical system. But there's many ways in which people get failed, especially with chronic health conditions. And so that's a situation where we need to think about how can we add value to the existing paradigm. I think it's unlikely that we're going to blow it up and create something new. I think we've got to work within the system to make it more of what it is that we want, more regulating, more consciousness, more love. I realize that sounds woo-woo and like I'm from California, but I am from California. So it's a different approach. And I think that's really what's necessary, to, as I think back to the conference that you had last fall, I'm thinking of some of the words of Paula. And, she talks about a credo, kind of a creed that we need to have for how we interact with each other, how we talk to each other, how we take care of each other. And I agree with her. We need that. And she was talking about the context of healing states of consciousness and the role of psychedelic medicine. And I do think that that has tremendous promise to help us with healing from the level of dysregulation, the level of trauma, and how it lives in our bodies and leads to more dysregulation. I think it is one of the interventions that's incredibly important with this new way of offering healthcare, health-centered care.
Yeah. And I think these same words that you are putting um, for, taking, a patient as an example, or you as an example, actually, are the same words we can use to talk about the planet or society in general. How is our glucose regulated? How is our HRV modulated? And I do believe that it's not only a metaphor. I do believe that there's the line between the individual level, the cell level, the individual level, the community level, and the systemic level, with the planetary included. It's not a metaphor. It's not a mirror. It's just we are the pulse. We are the HRV of this planet and of this symbiosis or not that we're living in. And it's no coincidence that I think lots of us are getting into the trauma world, and talking about trauma because, first of all, we don't know anything about it, but we know that there's something there that individually and socially we have pending. I would love to ask you, um, yeah, how did you get into trauma? Probably start there, and then how to normalize this conversation without trying to be, again, very patronizing, or we have all the answers, or some people are traumatized and some people aren't, and all these things that once we find a word, we just play a bit too much with it. So yeah.
I got into the work of trauma mostly through my own personal experiences. And I can tell you that when I went to Harvard Medical School, that I don't remember trauma ever being part of the conversation. We had as much education about trauma as we did about nutrition, meaning almost none. And what happened for me is that I had a conflict with a family member. And this is someone that I adore, that I've been very close to all of my life, 50 plus years. And we had an estrangement and we didn't talk for a year. I tried to have some healing conversations with her. They weren't welcomed. And as this was happening, kind of a parallel track was that there was work looking at MDMA assisted therapy at the same time. And as I started to look at that data, I was really surprised to see how effective MDMA assisted therapy was for people with post traumatic stress disorder. So, on the one side, I would say, ill educated about trauma. I had this experience with a family member. And then on the other side, I'm looking at this evidence showing that if the gold standard is mostly talk therapy, increasingly trauma informed talk therapy, maybe a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor for post traumatic stress disorder, the efficacy of that, Victor, is about 30%. It's abysmal. And MDMA assisted therapy is more than double as effective. So in the randomized trials that have been published over the last few years, people, um, somewhere around 2/3 to 71% no longer meet criteria for PTSD after 2 to 3 sessions. So that's remarkable. And when I saw that data, I realized, well, I'm 50. I need to do something about this because if I could clean up my side of the street, if I could resolve the trauma that's leading to behaviors that cause conflict with people I love, if I have the chance to do that, I'm going to do it. Even though I was totally square at the time and I'd never smoked marijuana, I'd never taken any drugs at all, no mushrooms, nothing. I felt like if I have the opportunity to resolve trauma, I'm going to take it. And I'm going to learn about this and I'm going to see how this might be offered to people who are suffering similarly. And not just with the mental health effects, which is what we tend to focus on with trauma, but the physical effects, because we know that the body is particularly vulnerable to toxic stress and traumatic or overwhelming experiences. And it's not so much what happens to you, it's the way that it lives on in your body, the signature of trauma that affects what I think of as your PINE network, your psychoimmunoneuroendocrine network.
Wow. And yes, again, this can also be read through the societies and environmental trauma that we've sustained over centuries or millennia. And I was in a Bessel van der Kolk talk a few weeks ago, and it was very amazing to see how, because it wasn't so clear to me that the place in the brain where the trauma gets stored is inaccessible to words. That's why
Yes,
talk therapy is limited in pharmaceuticals too. And that makes me think that, when we heal either through MDMA or EMDR or all these amazing alternative therapies that bypass, in a sense, the talk center of the brain and go directly to those areas where the trauma is stored. Uh, in a sense, I believe this is the same with the revolution we want to have to to normalize this conversation about the violence towards women in the scientific or medical arena, or patients in general, or the Black population, or the poor populations, and all these. We're all traumatized. Even white men are traumatized and are victims of the system. And that's why, I'm trying also to change the way I talk. And actually, our Congress, and I want to share with you the 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 the, the narrative for this year's Congress, which is, it's called Abracadabra. It's eh, but the thing here is that we will need science, we will need institutions, we will need all the system, as you say, that we have in place. We won't build another system uh, alternatively, but we do need to bring in other ways, which is not talk therapy, which is not Western ways of doing things, but an ancient wisdom and other ways to this conversation. So I'm not sure if the system will allow for this intuition to come through, because it will confront a lot. It will confront our truth systems. But I see in you that you've allowed that to happen in your personal life and in your medical practice and in your community and the retreats that you do and the books that you write. So in a sense, I see a path there. How would you invite people to join in this beautiful, silent, intuitive revolution?
it's such a good question because, this isn't, I don't do this work to be alone in some love oasis of pleasure and delight. It's really in the service of reducing suffering and creating the kind of planet and community that I most want to live in and contribute to. So I think the invitation, if I just think about the issue of trauma, I think the invitation starts with understanding your own trauma. A lot of folks will say, I got together with a friend in Los Angeles last week and he just got married for the fourth time. And a lot of folks feel like it's other people who have the trauma, it's not me. And so starting with yourself, starting with the humility and the vulnerability that it takes to assess your own traumatic signature. And that could begin with just doing an adverse childhood experiences score. I think that's a beautiful way in. More advanced would be to do some genetic and biomarker testing, which I also do with my clients. I mostly take care of executives and professional athletes, and then I've got some pro bono clients that I take care of. But in all of my patients, I'm doing precision medicine. I'm looking at genetics, I'm looking at biomarker testing, I'm looking at some of the things that are significantly affected by trauma. And that includes soul wounds, it includes epigenetic changes, it includes the way your genes that regulate your immune system and your metabolism are affected by trauma. And we know this from multi-generational studies that have been done, things like Project Ice Storm or um, the work of Rachel Yehuda looking at Holocaust survivors and people who survived the 9/11 terrorist attack. So I think it starts with the inventory, and then more advanced would be to do some biomarker testing to look at your cortisol awakening response, 4 or 5 point cortisol during the day, usually in the saliva, to look at things like your heart rate variability. I use a ring that tells me about heart rate variability. I use it to look at deep sleep. So my aim is to get about 2 hours of deep sleep every night. I know I'm at my best when I sleep in that way. So that would be my invitation. And I think there's also a way that, especially in medicine, we need to have less hubris. We really need to have more humility and more compassion for how challenging it is to work with trauma. And there are some people who aren't ready. There's this thing called the window of tolerance, sort of what it is you can tolerate. And what I love is that the window of tolerance, you can train yourself to expand your window of tolerance. But there are some people who first start to work with me and their window of tolerance is like this. They'll do an A score and that's it. Like that's all they can handle. But that's a great place to start. So start where you are, maybe with an inventory, maybe with some biomarker testing.
Tell me something. I'm thinking about people that, as we speak, are in areas of war, or they are just so marginalized, and so in living in so precarious situations that the general discourse is, these people don't have time to work with trauma. They don't have time to measure their cortisol and to sleep well, which is obviously true. And without, I'm generalizing here because I don't want to ruffle some feathers, but should we work as much as possible with these things to regulate ourselves even when we are in those precarious situations? I'm just putting this in because I'm very cautious of blaming the victim, and the systemic violence that we have, just for the food we're exposed to, all the way to violence and trauma and abuse and poverty and how do you say contamination and toxins and everything. But doesn't matter where we are in the spectrum. Should we, at the end of the day, as you say, you start with you. So how would you maintain this ambiguity in a sense, and push forward with an agenda to heal systemically. But at the end of the day, it's also a bottom-up approach that we need to encourage too.
We need a bottom-up approach. And I would say for people who are in the thick of it, they're in traumatizing situations, they're in a war zone, that's where bottom up really makes a difference. And so I talked a little more about diagnosis. In situations like that, you don't really need diagnosis. What you need is interventions that are effective and quick. So there's a few examples of things that are used, for instance, in the the war that's going on between Israel and Hamas, between Israel and Palestine. Jim Gordon, a psychiatrist, has done some really interesting work in terms of just shaking, the work of Peter Levine and how animals shake as a way of kind of getting their stress out of their body. And that can be so effective. Things like EMDR, things like somatic based mindfulness therapy can be really effective. So I would say we need those things. And if we have any hope of peace, we've got to regulate. We've got to get to a place where we're not so jacked up, our nervous systems are not so jacked up, that we're just reactive, 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 which rarely solves these kind of entrenched problems that we're facing.
Yeah, yeah. We need to shake just by looking at our Instagram feed. It should be also part of these basics of life, like eating, breathing, drinking water, moving, like also releasing all these pent-up tensions that just escalate when we are mirroring ourselves all the time. I want to ask you about, which is obviously related to all of this. I know you are changing your last name. Um, Tell me a bit about this freedom, and not only releasing your old ex-husband's last name, but just be able to choose a name for ourselves and then choose it again if we want.
It's such a reclamation. It's I was married for 20 years. I've got amazing children. I'm really grateful for the the 20 years of marriage that I had. And as we started to face an empty nest, I'm curious what that is in Spanish. As we started to face an empty nest, we realized that we just weren't the right fit for each other. And so, this is another thing that tends to happen mostly to women, that they're born with one name and they take on, that belongs to one man, and then they take on another name that belongs to another man. And for me to go back to the name that I had most of my life feels like sovereignty. It feels like a return to wholeness, a return to, this person that I was most of my life, not defined by a man. So that feels really exciting. There's some scary parts to it too. Um, but it's for the most part, it does feel like liberation. And it feels in many ways like I'm more able to regulate myself than ever before. And that feels like a miracle.
Can I ask what are the scary parts? Hmm.
Yes. Well, people who've gone through a divorce are aware of how your assets go down by half, sometimes more than half. So that's scary, when you're in your 50s and you like to serve in a way that isn't so much focused on money. So it requires some trust. It requires, kind of looking at money as energy and realizing, I'm going to make that up again. But, I'm living in a house by myself for the first time in more than 20 years. And that's super exciting. and it's a little daunting, right? When you're married, you always know what you're doing at night. You've got you've got your companions, you've got, you know, I've got 2 daughters. Um, and when you're on your own, there's a way that you can't distract from the truth. You can't distract from the work that needs to be done. So maybe scary isn't the right word. It's more that I'm facing my fears. I'm facing some of those things about financial management and, you know, um, cash flow projections and running a business, doing that entirely by myself, that requires some maturity. And yeah, it's not that I feel fearful about it. It's more that I want to step into my power about it.
That's beautiful. Emptiness is said nido vacío.
It's much better in Spanish,
Yeah, well, but
as
they signify
usual.
the same thing. And it's beautiful because it brings us full circle to where we started the conversation, like this emancipation from a system, which it's not all bad things. It's not that we are just but still you are connecting to a new way of being empowered, to use the word from the past paradigm, and reclaiming that ability through through your own intuition. And the good thing is that you know which things you don't want to reproduce again, in a sense, which is so easy to fall into when you don't have
Right.
enough resources that get you to inner work. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate how vulnerable you allow yourself to be, at least in this space with me, and I'm really um, grateful because I know it's always a bet that you're making, just to show it. So thank you. And I want to just finish the conversation in a way, talking about creativity and the creative life. You're publishing your sixth book. You have been writing for decades. And how to think about creativity, how to structure or not structure time, because we need unstructured time to be creative, and at the same time we can't just spontaneously show up in the middle of nowhere because we have so many things to do. So how do you think about creativity, and what would you wish um, to yourself in 10, 20 years to be in that path of creative life? And not I'm not thinking just about creative output, but just living creatively.
I think a lot about creativity because I feel more creative now than maybe at any other time in my life. And some of that is my daughter's being launched. So my youngest daughter is a freshman in college. My older daughter graduated from college and she's working in San Francisco. And so, this work that I've been doing for 24 years, mostly focused on raising these amazing women and being a clean mirror for them, that work is mostly done. I still show up and I still taking my older daughter out to dinner tomorrow night. So there's ways that I still have an important role to serve in, but it's the shift that um, we talk about in the yoga tradition, from the householder to the forest dweller. And for me, finding time for creativity as a householder was really challenging. So, like many people, I wrote my first book at night after my kids went to bed. And so I sacrificed sleep to, put 2 to 3 hours in for a year. That's not the best way to be creative or to get into a flow state. Certainly I did at times. But what I found is that my best time to write is first thing in the morning. So I like to get up, I like to make some green tea, I meditate, I connect to my inner divinity, and then I love to write. And if I have an entire day that's unstructured, that's just a total win. Doesn't happen too much anymore, but when it does, that's when the creative flow just really happens. And I just taught this retreat last weekend in Southern California in Topanga. And one of the things that I notice with my body now is that it's towards the end of meditation, like a 30-minute meditation. It's towards, I did 2 hours of yoga every day. It's during Shavasana and after Shavasana, that final kind of integration that happens. That's when the most creative ideas come through. So everyone's a little bit different in that regard, but at this time in my life, as I'm, looking at this forest dweller role that I'm so excited about, I I just feel like, the more time that I can protect so that it's unstructured and creative, the better. That's really the best possible thing. And and to really work with kind of the flows of your own cycle. There's some people who are more creative at night. That's not my story. I'm more of a morning person. So being able to honor, at least 8 a.m. until noon to be able to write in that period is so helpful. And then to spend the rest of the day kind of doing more of the householder things and, the business of launching a book and things like that. How about you? I'm curious about you, Victor. When's your most creative time?
Yeah, I almost started crying when I was hearing your answer because, yeah, for me, it's also the morning after exercise and after a shower. The shower, the exercise, gets all the funk out. The shower puts me in this state of, oh, the world is flowing, and then I get to read, I get to write, and that's the most beautiful part of my life, I'd say. But what always made me cry is that, that beautiful state where your best ideas come to you when you say you are in shavasana and you're in this transition. How, just invoking that feeling throughout the day, like throughout when you are washing dishes or when you're driving or where you are even in a Zoom call, and that possibility is always there. I know that, for myself, I need silence, total silence, and I don't want anyone, and I, turn off all notifications and everything. But that possibility of, the channel is always open, and that possibility for me, it's so interesting to keep exploring for however time we have left here. Yeah.
It's such a good point. I mean, the way I would maybe put that in my own words is that almost everything you do has the opportunity to be a sacred ritual and to help you get into that regulated state that allows creativity to come through and helps you to clear that channel so that you can really feel the creative impulse. So, as you said, it could be washing dishes, it could be taking out the garbage, it could be gardening, it could be chopping vegetables. Pretty much anything can be a sadhana, a sacred ritual.
Yeah. Yeah. Even a conversation like this one, like it's amazing how my last conversation 1 hour ago, I was in a total different state, which I will now, apologize to the people where I was in a call with because I was kind of wasn't there. Um, but even conversation is for me that's the magic of podcast. It's you get to be in a flow just by turning off notifications and being in front of a person for 50 minutes. um the magic is there, and that's thank you for reinstalling that feeling that as we said, it's always there, it's ancient, it's just we're just remembered that we forgot.
That's right. And I feel it every time I hang out with you, Victor. So
Mm.
it's a touchstone that you share with everyone who comes in contact with you. It's
Mm.
delightful and just an incredibly important service. You've got this light that you offer to the world, and it's beautiful.
Thank you, Sarah. Coming from you, that means a lot. And it gives me energy to keep doing what I'm doing. And I hope you know it for you that it's the same. Like, this always it's a co-creation and I'm very happy that you've been kind enough to connect with me from that place. Because at the end of the day, that's it goes beyond having Sarah on the Congress here in Mexico, having Sarah in the podcast. It's just human and a human conspiring to co-create the love that we already are.
Yes. And hopefully to serve and offer to others that opportunity. It's not just between you and me, it's something that is infectious that we can spread, and the world needs it right now.
Hmm. Thank you, Sarah. What is your chosen last name that you want to embody now?
So my last name is Zal, Szal, and my publisher wanted me to do a slower transition. So Gottfried is my ex-husband's name. So my latest book is Sara Szal Gottfried, Szal. So we're making a slow change,
Yeah,
más despacio.
it makes the whole sense, and that's what we're talking about. It's just we are using what we have and creating what we want without discarding anything. So thank you. I'll start referring to you as Sara Szal Gottfried, and someday you'll let me know if any of those names changes. I'll make sure I'll use them. Uh,
Or you could just call me Sarah. That
Sarah,
works too.
perfect. And just to close this conversation, there's a quote I wrote this morning on my notebook, and it says it's from J.K. Chesterton. It says, "All that we call spirit and art and ecstasy only means that for one awful instant we remember that we forget."
That's the ultimate in humility. Just realizing that, when we have attack thoughts, when we get bent out of shape, we're just forgetting very briefly. And the question is, how long does it take for you to remember again, to connect to that spirit?
How long? That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon,
Yes, I hope so.
and
Thanks,
good luck with
Victor.
the book launch.
Thank you.